Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was reborn in the Attack on Titan world as humanity's strongest hero. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The dream was always the same. It wasn't a memory, not quite. It was an echo, a resonance of sensation and emotion that clung to his soul like battlefield dust. He was older, taller, his limbs humming with a power that felt like a star contained within his veins. The sky was a bruised purple, choked with smoke and the metallic tang of blood. Around him, a symphony of destruction played its terrible tune, the shriek of twisting metal, the roar of unnatural power, the screams of the dying and the desperate shouts of the living. A face swam in the chaos, pale and gaunt, framed by white hair. A hand, scarred and missing 2 fingers, reached for him. Tamura Shigaraki. The name was a curse on his tongue. He could feel the phantom pressure on his own face, the ghost of a grip that sought to unmake him, to turn him to dust. He could feel the legacy of 8 souls before him screaming in unison, a chorus of defiance against the inevitable. Save them, Izuku. The voice was thin, ethereal, a woman's whisper carried on a phantom wind. Nana Shimura, you are not alone. A deep, booming reassurance, the voice of a skeletal man with hollow eyes and a smile that could light up the world. Tashinori Yagi. All Might. Then, the feeling of impact. A shattering sensation, not of his bones, but of something deeper. A blinding white light, a profound, soul-deep exhaustion, and then, silence. Izuku Midoriya gasped, his eyes flying open. The ceiling above him was not a bruised, war-torn sky, but rough-hewn wooden beams, dark with age and soot. The air didn't taste of blood and ash. It smelled of coal smoke, baked bread, and the faint, earthy scent of the river. He was small. His hands, when he held them up, were the soft, unblemished hands of a child. He was 10 years old. Again, he sat up, the thin wool blanket pooling around his waist. A low fire crackled in the hearth across the small room, casting long, dancing shadows. This was his life now. For 10 years, this had been his reality. The life of Izuku, son of a blacksmith in the Shiganshina district, a city nestled on the southern edge of humanity's domain, a cage they called Wall Maria. The dream, or whatever it was, left a familiar ache in his chest. It was the grief of a war he'd already won, for friends he'd already lost. In his mind, the faces of Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, Kaken, they were all so clear, so painfully vivid. He was a hero who had fulfilled his purpose, a symbol of peace who had brought an end to the reign of all for one. And his reward, it seemed, was this. A second chance. A second life. He wasn't sure if it was a blessing or a curse. Izuku? Are you awake, sweet boy? A soft voice called from the main room. I'm up, Mom. He called back, his voice small and high-pitched, a constant source of dissonance with the man he was inside. He swung his legs over the side of the simple cot. His new mother, Alara, was a kind woman with warm hands and a smile that never failed to soothe the jagged edges of his memories. His father, Kale, was a blacksmith, a large, quiet man whose pride was in the sturdiness of his work, from the hinges on a neighbor's door to the replacement blades he occasionally forged for the garrison. They were good people. They were his parents. And the guilt of loving them, of replacing the memory of his own mother, Inko Midoriya, was a quiet burden he carried every day. He dressed quickly in a simple linen shirt and brown trousers, his movements efficient and precise. He took a moment to look at his reflection in the small, warped pane of glass by the door. A child's face stared back. Big, green eyes, wide with a knowledge they shouldn't possess. A spray of freckles across his cheeks. A mop of untamable, dark green hair. It was his face, yet not. It was the face of the boy who had dreamed of being a hero, not the man who had paid the price for it. The strangest part of his rebirth was the power. Or rather, the lack of it. One for all was gone. He could feel its absence like a phantom limb. Sometimes, when his emotions ran high, he felt a faint warmth hum beneath his skin, a spark in a deep well of emptiness. But it was nothing he could grasp, nothing he could call upon. The vestiges, his predecessors, were little more than whispers in his nightmares. They were there, he knew, but they were dormant, locked away behind a door he no longer had the key for. He walked into the main room, a combination of a kitchen and a living space. Elara was kneading dough on a floured countertop, her brow furrowed in concentration. Kale was already gone, the rhythmic clang, clang, clang from the forge attached to their home a familiar morning rhythm. "Nightmares again?" Elara asked, not looking up. She always knew. "Just a dream." Izuku lied gently, grabbing a small pail. "I'll get the water." She finally looked at him, her eyes soft with concern. "You're a good boy, Izuku. Too serious for your age, but good." She wiped a flour-dusted hand on his cheek, leaving a white streak. "Go on, then, and see if your friends are causing trouble already." A small, genuine smile touched Izuku's lips. "Eren is always causing trouble, Mom. That's like asking if the sun will rise." He stepped outside into the cool morning air. Shiganshina was already bustling. Merchants were setting up their stalls in the main square, the sound of their chatter mingling with the bleating of sheep and the rumble of cartwheels on cobblestone. And looming over it all, casting a permanent morning shadow, was the wall, 50 meters of sheer, unyielding stone. A monument to both humanity's ingenuity and its terror. For a century it had kept them safe. For a century it had kept them trapped. Izuku looked up at it, his analytical mind kicking in, a habit he couldn't break. What is it made of? No quarry could produce this much stone. The seams are perfect, too perfect for human construction of this era. Is it reinforced internally? What's its structural weak point? These were the questions that filled his new journals. Back in his first life, his notebooks had been filled with hero analysis, costume designs, and quirk theories. Now they were filled with a different kind of analysis. Titan anatomy, theoretical. ODM gear, strengths and tactical limitations. Wall integrity, and siege vulnerabilities. He'd filled 13 volumes already. He called it Hero Analysis for a World Without Heroes. He was on his way back from the well, the pails sloshing with water, when he heard the familiar shouts. "Take that back, you pig!" Izuku sighed. Eren. He rounded the corner to see a familiar scene. Eren Yeager, his face flushed with righteous fury, was standing up to 3 older boys who were tormenting a smaller, blonde-haired child huddled on the ground. Armin Arlert. "What's he talking about now?" One of the bullies sneered, shoving Eren. "The Survey Corps? Those idiots are just Titan fodder. Wasting our taxes to go out there and die. They're fighting for humanity's freedom." Eren shot back, balling his fists. "They're not cowards like you, living in this cage and pretending we're safe." "Cage? It's kept us alive, you freak!" Izuku set the water pail down. He could have handled this in a dozen ways. In his old life, he would have rushed in, a quirkless, terrified boy trying to do the right thing and getting beaten for his troubles. Now, he was different. The fear was gone, replaced by a weary pragmatism. He walked forward calmly, his footsteps measured. "He's right, you know," Izuku said, his voice even. The 3 bullies turned to him. "Oh, look, it's the professor," the leader scoffed. Izuku had earned the nickname for his strange vocabulary and tendency to lecture. "Come to protect your suicidal friend?" "No," Izuku replied, stopping a few feet away. He looked not at the bullies, but at the garrison guards stationed on the wall far above them. "I came to point out that Commander Pixis has authorized stricter punishments for public disturbances, especially those involving assault. The report paperwork is apparently dreadful. The garrison patrol will be through here in about 3 minutes. If they find you 3 standing over 2 injured boys..." He let the sentence hang in the air, his gaze flicking meaningfully towards the bullies' fists, then back to their faces. He didn't threaten them. He simply laid out a sequence of events, and let them draw their own conclusion. The bullies exchanged uneasy glances. They were thugs, not strategists. The thought of dealing with the garrison was enough to deflate their bravado. "TCH, whatever. This is boring anyway," the leader grumbled, shoving his friends. "Let's go." They sauntered off, casting one last glare at Eren. Eren was still vibrating with anger. "I could have taken them, and you would have gotten a black eye, and Armin would still be on the ground," Izuku said calmly, offering a hand to Armin. "The objective wasn't to win a fight, it was to make them leave." Mission accomplished. Armin took his hand, dusting himself off. Thanks, Izuku. Your way is always more efficient. His way is boring, Eren declared, though the fire in his eyes had dimmed slightly. He looked at Izuku, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. Why are you never angry, Izuku? They insult the Survey Corps. They insult everyone who wants to see the outside world. Don't you care? From behind them, a quiet voice spoke. He cares. He just doesn't shout about it. Mikasa Ackerman had appeared as she always did, silently. She carried a small bundle of firewood, her dark eyes fixed on Eren with unwavering intensity. It's not about shouting, Eren, Izuku said, picking his water pail back up. Anger is a motivator. It's a powerful one. I get that. But it's also a fire that burns you from the inside out. It makes you reckless. He gestured with his head towards the wall. What do we know about Titans? They're big, they eat people, and they seem to be mindless. That's it. Running at them screaming won't work. We know nothing about their biology, their origins, their weaknesses. Shouting for freedom is good, but a plan is better. This was their core, recurring argument. Eren, the passionate idealist, saw the world in black and white, freedom or slavery, courage or cowardice. Izuku, the traumatized pragmatist, saw only variables, threats, and objectives. He'd seen firsthand what blind passion led to on a battlefield. It led to dead friends and Pyrrhic victories. So we should just sit here and study? Eren scoffed, kicking a loose stone. While they die for us? No, Izuku said, his voice turning sharper, a hint of the warforged leader he once was bleeding through. We learn. We prepare. We find a weakness and we exploit it. We make sure that when we fight we win, not just for a day, but for good. Every soldier the Survey Corps loses without gaining significant intelligence is a waste. It's a tragedy we can't afford. Eren fell silent, chewing on Izuku's words. He didn't agree, not really, but Izuku's conviction was so absolute it was hard to argue against. Mikasa watched the exchange with her usual quiet intensity, while Armin looked at Izuku with undisguised admiration. He's right, Eren, Armin said softly. My grandfather's book says the outside world has oceans of salt water, fields of ice, and sand that glows. If we want to see it, we can't just be brave, we have to be smart. Izuku gave Armin a small smile. He saw so much potential in the boy, a brilliant, strategic mind crippled by self-doubt. In a way, Armin reminded him of his younger self, before One for All. The four of them spent the rest of the morning together, a strange but inseparable quartet. They walked by the canal, watching the barges float by. Eren raged, Mikasa watched, Armin dreamed, and Izuku observed. He analyzed the flow of people, the state of the infrastructure, the morale of the garrison soldiers they passed. He was a general scouting enemy territory, except the enemy was complacency, and the territory was his own home. Later, sitting on the riverbank, Eren brought up the Survey Corps again. It was his favorite topic. When we're old enough, we're all joining, he declared. It wasn't a question. Armin nodded hesitantly. Mikasa said nothing, but her grip on her firewood bundle tightened. Her answer was wherever Eren went. Eren looked at Izuku, expecting an argument. What about you, Professor? You going to stay here and write in your little books forever? Izuku stared out at the water, his green eyes distant. He thought of the war. He thought of the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had no desire to fight again. The very thought of it filled him with a bone-deep weariness. But the thought of standing by while others suffered, while his friends marched to their deaths, that was worse. If you three are foolish enough to go, Izuku said, his voice low, then I can't very well let you go alone, can I? Someone will have to keep you from getting killed in the first 5 minutes. A slow grin spread across Eren's face. It was the closest to an enthusiastic agreement he'd ever gotten from Izuku. Mikasa's shoulders relaxed a fraction. As they sat there, a comfortable silence falling over them, Izuku felt it again. A faint thrumming in his right arm, like a loose guitar string vibrating in his bones. He clenched his fist. The feeling intensified for a second, a spark of warmth that promised incredible power, before fading back into nothingness. He gritted his teeth in frustration. It was a cruel joke. To have saved a world with that power, only to have it dangle just out of reach in a world that needed it even more. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces. The sounds of the city were a peaceful backdrop. Complacency. The thought returned to him. This peace was a lie. A century of quiet had made them forget the monster at the door. He had seen a society grow complacent before, lulled into a false sense of security by its heroes. He knew how quickly that could all be shattered. A fall is coming, the whispers in his dreams had warned him. The town bell began to toll, signaling the return of the Survey Corps from their latest expedition. It was a somber affair. The gates would open, and the few who survived would ride back in, their faces grim, their numbers a fraction of what they were when they left. Aaron was on his feet in an instant, his eyes alight with a feverish excitement. "Come on! We have to see them!" He dragged Armin and a reluctant Mikasa with him towards the main street. Izuku followed at a slower pace, his heart heavy. He didn't see heroes returning. He saw survivors. He saw the acceptable losses of a failed strategy. The crowd was a mix of emotions. There were hopeful families, silent onlookers, and jeering merchants. "Look at that! All our taxes for a handful of survivors!" one man shouted. Aaron spun around, ready to fight, but the grim visage of the returning soldiers silenced him. Their eyes were hollow, their green wings of freedom cloaks tattered and stained. Commander Keith Shotties rode at the front, his face a mask of granite. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man who had just led dozens of his people to their deaths. Izuku watched, his gaze sweeping over the wounded, the missing horses, the carts carrying the unidentifiable remains of the fallen. This was war, not the flashy, quirk-filled battles of his past, but a grim, grinding war of attrition against an incomprehensible foe. And humanity was losing. His eyes met those of a young soldier, barely a teenager, whose arm was gone at the shoulder. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide with a terror that would never leave him. In that moment, Izuku wasn't a 10-year-old boy in Shiganshina. He was Deku, the symbol of peace, looking at a fellow soldier broken by the horrors of his duty. An instinct, older and more powerful than his current life, rose in him. "I have to help them. I have to save them." The thrumming in his limbs returned, stronger this time, a palpable heat that made his muscles ache with a longing to be used. He squeezed his fists so tight his knuckles turned white, fighting the sensation down. Not yet. He couldn't. He didn't even know how. The procession passed. The crowd dispersed, their fleeting interest gone. Aaron was trembling, but not with excitement anymore. It was with a resolve that was terrifying in its intensity. "It doesn't matter," Aaron whispered, his fists clenched at his sides. "I'm still going to join. I'm going to get strong enough to kill them all." Izuku placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "I know, Aaron," he said softly. There was no point in arguing now. The boy had seen his path. All Izuku could do was walk it with him, and try to keep him from falling off the edge. As they started the walk home, the sun beginning its slow descent towards the top of the wall, a strange feeling washed over Izuku. The air grew still. A deep, subaudible tremor vibrated through the cobblestones under his feet, so faint he thought he might have imagined it. The birds went silent. A primal part of his brain, the part that had faced down Gigantomachia, screamed that something was wrong. He looked up at the wall. Everyone did. There was a sudden, blinding flash of yellow lightning, striking the top of the wall from a cloudless sky. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was focused, deliberate. It was a herald, and then it appeared. For 100 years, the wall had been the tallest thing in their world. An absolute, unbreachable constant. Now, something was looking over it, ahead. Colossal. Skinless, exposing the raw, red muscle and sinew beneath. Steam hissed from its jaws, its face an expressionless mask of horror. It was a thing that should not exist, a nightmare given flesh and bone on a scale that defied all reason. For a moment, the entire district was frozen in a collective, silent scream. Time seemed to stop. Izuku felt his blood run cold. His mind, his analytical, tactical mind, shut down, overwhelmed by the sheer, context-shattering wrongness of what he was seeing. This wasn't a titan. This was a god of destruction. Then, the moment broke. The colossal titan's foot, impossibly large, swung forward and impacted the outer gate of Shiganshina. The sound was not an explosion. It was the end of the world. A deafening, soul-shaking boom that was felt more than it was heard. The gate, a marvel of engineering that had stood for a century, vaporized into a cloud of shrapnel and dust. Boulders the size of houses were launched into the city like cannonballs, arcing through the sky. Chaos erupted. The silent awe turned into a tidal wave of pure, animal panic. People screamed, tripping over each other in a desperate stampede to escape the impossible. A massive chunk of the wall crashed into a nearby house, the crunch of wood and stone followed by silent screams. Izuku's training, his past life, slammed back into the forefront of his mind. He grabbed Armin, who was frozen in place, his eyes wide with terror. "Move! Armin, move!" He shoved the boy forward, his eyes scanning the chaos for Eren and Mikasa. He saw them. They weren't running away. They were running towards the destruction. Towards their home. "Mom!" Eren screamed, his voice thin with terror. Izuku's heart plummeted into his stomach. He knew, with a sickening certainty, what they would find. He ran after them, his small legs pumping, his mind a whirlwind of past and present trauma. This can't be happening again. Not again. He saw the remains of their street. Houses were flattened. A giant boulder had crushed the roof of the Jaeger home. And underneath the wreckage he saw a pair of legs. He saw Carla Jaeger, trapped. He saw Eren and Mikasa desperately trying to lift a massive wooden beam. And then he saw it, walking through the newly made hole in the wall, its body unnaturally lean, its face fixed in a permanent, horrifying grin, was another titan. It wasn't as large as the colossal one, but it was more than big enough. Its vacant eyes scanned the screaming populace before they settled, as if by some cruel design, on the trapped woman. The world narrowed to that single, horrific scene. The smiling titan approached. Eren screamed in denial. Mikasa's face was a pale mask of shock. Hannes, the garrison soldier, stood frozen nearby, his sword half-drawn, his face a portrait of abject fear. For Izuku Midoriya, time fractured. He saw Carla Jaeger, helpless under the rubble. He saw Sir Night-Eye, impaled and dying. He saw his own mother Inko, weeping for him. He saw Bakugo, sacrificing himself. He saw All Might, withering away. Every failure, every loss, every person he couldn't save from both his lives coalesced into this one, perfect moment of horror, powerlessness. It was a poison he thought he'd purged from his system. Yet here it was, more potent than ever. The smiling titan's footsteps were heavy, deliberate thuds that shook the very ground. Each one was a beat in a funeral dirge. Closer. And closer. And closer. The world had devolved into a maelstrom of raw, primal fear. The symphony of a peaceful city morning had been violently replaced by a cacophony of terror, the brittle crack of splintering wood, the thunderous crash of stone on stone, and above it all, the high, thin screams of humanity facing its own extinction. For Izuku Midoriya, the chaos was a familiar, unwelcome blanket. He had lived this before, in a different time, a different world. The specifics were different, but the feeling, the crushing, suffocating weight of impending doom, was identical. His feet, small and clumsy in their panic, pounded against the uneven cobblestones as he chased after Eren and Mikasa. Dust and grit filled the air, coating his tongue and stinging his eyes. Ahead, through the swirling haze, the scene resolved into a tableau of perfect despair. The Jaeger home was a ruin, a colossal chunk of the wall having cleaved it in two. Underneath a massive support beam, a familiar figure was pinned. Carla Jaeger, and approaching her, with the leisurely, unhurried pace of a predator that knows its prey cannot escape, was the smiling titan. Its grin was a gash of nightmare fuel, a permanent fixture of mindless appetite carved into a vaguely human face. Its eyes were vast, empty pools of nothingness. They were fixed on Carla. "Mom!" Eren's voice was a raw, shredded thing, the sound of a child's universe collapsing. He and Mikasa were clawing at the immense beam, their small hands straining, their efforts utterly, pathetically futile. Izuku's lungs burned. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He saw Hannes, the garrison soldier who was often drunk but always kind, draw his blades. For a fleeting second, a spark of hope ignited in Izuku's chest. A soldier. An adult. Someone trained for this. But then he saw Hannese's face. It was chalk white, glistening with a cold sweat. His hands trembled, not with anticipation, but with an ague of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked from the approaching Titan to the two smaller ones flanking it, and his resolve shattered like glass. The survival instinct, the primal command to run, overrode any sense of duty. He sheathed his blades, his movements jerky and panicked. "Eren! Mikasa!" Hannese yelled, his voice cracking. He scooped them up, ignoring their protests, and began to run. "No! My mom! She's still." Eren's struggles were useless against the man's strength. Carla Jaeger looked at her children being carried to safety, and a look of profound, heartbreaking relief washed over her face. Then, she looked at the Titan, now looming directly over her, and her expression settled into one of terrified acceptance. And Izuku Midoriya broke. The sight of Hannese running, the sight of a mother accepting her fate to save her son, the sound of Eren's helpless screams, it was a crucible. Every ghost from his past life rose up in a single, silent scream within his soul. He saw Gran Torino coughing up blood. He saw the city blocks he'd failed to protect. He saw the terrified faces of civilians he couldn't reach in time. He saw Sir Night Eye, impaled, telling him to smile. He saw Bakugo, a hole blasted through his chest, all for him. Not again. The phrase was not a thought. It was a commandment from the deepest part of his being. Not again. Powerlessness. It was the original sin of his first life, the quirkless state that had defined his childhood. He had defeated it, overcome it, inherited a universe of power to banish it forever. To feel it again now, so completely, so utterly, was more than he could bear. It was a violation. No! The scream ripped itself from his 10-year-old throat, but the voice was not that of a child. It was the layered, resonant roar of a man, a hero, a legacy. It was the culmination of 2 lifetimes of frustration, grief, and righteous fury. And with the scream, something deep within him, something dormant and chained, shattered its prison. It started as a spark behind his eyes, then a wildfire in his veins. The phantom warmth he'd occasionally felt erupted into a searing, incandescent inferno. It was a feeling he knew better than his own heartbeat. Green lightning, wild and untamed, exploded from his body. It wasn't the controlled, humming sheath of full calling. This was raw. This was primal. This was a torrent. The cobblestones around his small feet cracked and split apart as emerald energy arced from his limbs, scorching the ground. The air itself seemed to vibrate, smelling sharply of ozone and impossible power. In the back of his mind, the whispers of the vestiges were no longer whispers. They were a unified, deafening roar, a chorus of 8 generations screaming in unison. Use US. He didn't know how. He didn't think. He only acted. The smiling Titan had reached down. Its impossibly long fingers, each one thicker than Izuku's entire body, were closing around Carla's broken form. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Izuku saw Carla's eyes widen in a final moment of terror. He saw the shadow of the Titan's hand fall over her. He bent his knees, the raw power of one for all pulling in his legs, threatening to tear his juvenile muscles from the bone. He didn't care. The pain was irrelevant. He pushed off. The ground beneath him didn't just crack, it cratered. He didn't run, he launched. A green and black blur, a verdant comet of pure force, he shot across the ruined street. He was a projectile fired from the cannon of his own desperation. In the fraction of a second he was airborne, he pulled his right arm back, the limb glowing with an intensity that bleached the color from the world. He could feel every bone, every sinew, every cell screaming in protest, warning him that his body was not prepared for this. He ignored them. One for all, 100%. He didn't shout the name. He didn't have to. The power spoke for itself. His fist, small and childlike, connected with the back of the Titan's massive hand. The sound was not a punch. It was a sonic boom, a concussive, world-shaking crack boom that dwarfed the sound of the wall breaking. For a single, silent instant, a sphere of incandescent green light enveloped his fist and the Titan's hand. Then, the sphere imploded, and the shockwave followed. The Titan's hand and forearm did not break. They did not fly back. They simply ceased to exist. Vaporized. Obliterated into a shower of steaming red mist and blackened, vaporized bone fragments. The force of the blow was so immense that the shockwave traveled up the Titan's arm, causing its entire body to stagger back several steps, its remaining arm flailing for balance. The recoil was just as devastating. The same force that had annihilated the Titan's limbs slammed back into Izuku's small frame. He was thrown backward like a rag doll, a shriek of pure, unadulterated agony finally escaping his lips as the power he'd unleashed turned on its vessel. His right arm, the limb that had delivered the godlike blow, was a ruined catastrophe. The bones had shattered into dozens of pieces, turning the limb into a limp, mangled mess of pulped muscle and splintered bone, scorched black and purple from the violent energy discharge. Pain, white-hot and absolute, flared through his nervous system. His vision dissolved into a gray, swimming static. He hit the ground hard, tumbling bonelessly across the rubble-strewn street before coming to a stop in a heap. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him completely was the smiling Titan, still staggering, its grin now seeming less mindless and more like a mask of confusion. And beyond it, Hannes, frozen mid-stride, staring back with eyes so wide they seemed ready to fall from his skull. Then nothing. Hannes's mind was a blank slate of pure, uncomprehending shock. One moment, he was running, his heart a frantic drum of shame and terror, Eren and Mikasa fighting in his arms. The next, a sound like the sky cracking open had made him stop and turn. He had seen it. A flash of impossible green light. And then the Titan, the very monster he had run from, had reeled back, its arms simply gone. And there, lying in a broken heap on the ground, was the blacksmith's boy. Izuku. The quiet, strange, overly serious child, now smoking faintly, his arm twisted at an angle that made Hannes's stomach churn. What in the hell was that? He breathed, his voice a hoarse whisper. His brain tried to connect the dots. The green light. The boy. The Titan's destroyed arm. The equation didn't compute. It was like trying to solve for X when X was the wrath of God. He was shaken from his stupor by Eren's renewed screaming. The boy had seen it too, his terror momentarily forgotten, replaced by a stunned, gaping disbelief. But the moment of reprieve was over. The smiling Titan, though injured and confused, was still a Titan. It righted itself, its empty gaze falling once more upon the still-trapped Carla. Two more Titans were now lumbering through the breach, their shadows falling over the street. The brutal reality of their situation crashed back down on Hannes. Whatever miracle had just happened, it hadn't been enough. Carla was still trapped. He was still just one man, and the monsters were still coming. He looked at Carla. He saw her mouth the words, "Thank you? Go! Live!" Tears streamed down Hannes's face, mingling with the sweat and grime. He was a coward. He knew it. But he was a coward who had been entrusted with the lives of these children. He turned and ran, a guttural sob escaping his throat. Behind him, the smiling Titan reached down again, this time with its remaining hand. It lifted the rubble, and then it lifted Carla. Eren's screams became a sound of pure, soul-shattering anguish as he was forced to watch his mother's last moments. The crunch, the spray of blood, it was a scene that would be burned into his memory forever. As Hannes ran, a garrison soldier, a young man named Hugo, was helping to direct the panicked civilian evacuation. He saw Hannes carrying the two screaming children, and his eyes were drawn to the source of their trauma. He saw the Titan, the blood, and then he saw the other boy, the little green-haired one, lying twisted and unmoving amidst the debris. "Sir!" Hugo shouted, his training kicking in. Another child! He didn't know what had happened. He hadn't seen the green flash, only its aftermath. All he saw was a casualty, a child caught in the crossfire. He sprinted over, his heart pounding, and knelt beside Izuku's unconscious form. He recoiled in horror at the sight of the boy's arm. It was destroyed, a mangled ruin that looked more like something from a butcher's shop than a human limb. The fact that the boy was even alive was a miracle. Without a second thought, Hugo gently scooped up Izuku's small, broken body. The boy was eerily light. He cradled him carefully, trying not to jostle the horrifyingly damaged arm, and ran, following Hannes towards the inner gate and the evacuation boats. Among the terrified, stampeding crowd, a handful of others had witnessed the impossible event. A baker, his face pale with shock, stumbled along, muttering to his wife. "Did you see it? A light, like lightning, but green." An old woman, her face a mask of terror, clutched a religious icon to her chest. It was a demon, or an angel. It struck the beast down. A single refugee, a young man who had been close enough to see it all, stared back at the chaos, his eyes wide. He didn't see a demon or an angel. He saw something else. He saw the small, green-haired boy launch himself forward. He saw the blinding flash. He saw the Titan's arm disintegrate. A flash. He whispered to no one in particular, the words lost in the screams of the dying. A green flash. The legend of Shiganshina's fall had begun. And woven into its fabric of terror and loss was a single, inexplicable thread of impossible power. A myth was born in the blood and dust, the story of the green flash. The air on the ferry was thick with the stench of fear and the suffocating pall of grief. The boat was dangerously overcrowded, a miserable vessel packed with the traumatized, weeping remnants of Shiganshina. Every person on board was a ghost, haunted by the homes they had lost and the loved ones they had seen devoured. The distant screams from the city and the sight of the pillar of smoke on the horizon were a constant, brutal reminder of the hell they had just escaped. In a small, cleared space on the deck, Izuku Midoriya lay unconscious. The soldier, Hugo, had laid him down gently on a spare cloak, his mangled arm positioned as carefully as possible. He was a horrific sight, a child broken by the chaos. Eren sat nearby, huddled between Armin and Mikasa. Armin was weeping uncontrollably, his small body racked with sobs. Mikasa was unnervingly still, her face a blank, emotionless mask, her eyes staring into nothing. But Eren wasn't looking at the burning city. He wasn't crying. His gaze was fixed, with a terrifying intensity, on Izuku. He had seen it. He had seen his quiet, nerdy friend, the one who always talked about plans and analysis, erupt in a blaze of godlike power. He had seen that green lightning. He had seen him fly. He had seen him obliterate a Titan's arm with a single punch. It was a memory so vivid and so impossible that his mind struggled to contain it. But his mother was still dead. The thought was a venomous serpent coiling in his gut. Izuku had this incredible power. A power beyond comprehension. And yet, it hadn't been enough. He had saved Carla from the first grab, only for her to be eaten moments later. The brief, miraculous hope had only served to make the final, gruesome outcome even more painful. A low groan escaped Izuku's lips. Eren's attention sharpened. He watched, his eyes wide, as a faint wisp of steam began to rise from Izuku's ruined arm. It was thin at first, barely visible, but it grew steadily. The skin around the mangled flesh, which had been turning a deathly gray, began to flush with a healthy pink. The shredded tissue seemed to tremble and writhe, slowly, unnaturally, knitting themselves back together. It was a subtle, grotesque, and utterly miraculous process. Izuku's eyelids fluttered. He was delirious, trapped in the fever dream between worlds. His lips parted, and he began to mutter, his voice weak and hoarse. "Have to save them." The words were a dagger in Eren's heart. "My fault," Izuku mumbled, his head thrashing weakly from side to side. "Should have been faster. Stronger." A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. "Not enough. Never enough." Eren stared, his mind a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. Awe battled with confusion. Gratitude warred with a new, burgeoning resentment. Who was Izuku Midoriya? This strange, quiet boy he'd known for years, who was he really? Where did this power come from? This ability to heal from an injury that should have been fatal? All his life, Eren had felt like a bird in a cage, rattling the bars, screaming for a freedom he could only dream of. He had believed the key to that freedom was the Survey Corps, was courage, was the will to fight. But now, he had seen something else. He had seen real power. The kind of power that didn't just rattle the bars but could shatter the whole cage. His mother's final, terrified moments flashed in his mind. The crunch of bone. The spray of blood. The Titan's sickening grin. The absolute, crushing helplessness he had felt. His grief, pure and raw, began to curdle. It mixed with his rage, with his confusion, with the awe he felt for Izuku's impossible power. It all swirled together, hardening in his heart, crystallizing into a new, terrible resolve. Courage wasn't enough. Anger wasn't enough. He needed what Izuku had. He needed that strength. He needed the power to never feel helpless again. He looked away from Izuku, his gaze turning towards the horizon, towards the world that had taken everything from him. His small hands clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles turned white. "I'm going to kill them," he whispered, the words a venomous promise to the universe. Mikasa stirred beside him, her vacant eyes finally focusing on his face. Aaron's voice rose, gaining strength, becoming a declaration of war. "Every last one of them. I'm going to wipe them from this world." It was the same vow he would have made regardless. But now, it was different. It was tainted, or perhaps focused, by what he had witnessed. It was no longer just the desperate cry of a vengeful boy. It was the first step on a path towards acquiring absolute power. He had seen what was possible. He had seen a human being become a god for a fleeting moment. And in his heart, a new, terrible fire was kindled, burning alongside his grief, the desperate, all-consuming need for the power to change it all. The power of his strange, broken friend, the boy they would come to call the Green Flash of Shiganshina. 5 years. For most, it was a lifetime. It was the span that turned a child into a youth, grief into a scar, and terror into a driving, relentless purpose. For Izuku Midoriya, 5 years was a blink, a breath, a fleeting moment against the backdrop of a life already lived and lost. Yet these 5 years had been the most grueling, frustrating, and vital of his second existence. The time in the refugee camps had been a blur of hunger, sickness, and despair. He had recovered from his catastrophic injuries with a speed that defied all logic, his arm knitting itself back together over the course of a few agonizing weeks. The process was not clean or painless. It left his nights filled with fever dreams where the vestiges of One for All, their voices clearer now, more distinct, spoke to him in riddles and warnings. "The vessel is not ready." Nana Shimura's voice was a gentle but firm caution. "Patience, Ninth. A foundation must be laid before a fortress can be built." Daigoro Banjo's gruff tone was a constant reminder of his physical limits. "Your past is a lesson, not a crutch. Do not let your old strength become your new weakness." The third user, whose name still eluded him, spoke with the cold pragmatism of a battlefield commander. He learned the truth of their words the hard way. In the early days after Shiganshina, driven by a desperate need to reclaim his power, he had tried to summon it again. The attempt had ended with him collapsing, his legs snapping like a dry twig under the strain of a mere fraction of a percentage of One for All's true might. His new body, a child's body, was a fragile glass container trying to hold the power of a raging sea. He was a master swordsman given a blade made of brittle ice, and so, he had changed his approach. He could not rely on the explosive power he once knew. He had to start over. From zero. His training began not with power, but with the body. He spent 5 years engaged in the most rigorous physical conditioning he could devise, combining the hellish regimen All Might had once given him with the advanced calisthenics of a pro hero. He ran until his lungs burned, did push-ups until his arms gave out, and stretched until his muscles screamed. He was building the vessel, brick by painful brick. He also studied. He devoured every book, every manual, every scrap of information he could find. He learned about this world's history, its primitive technology, its rigid social structures. He spent countless hours with Armin, whose grandfather's hidden library became their sanctuary. While Armin dreamed of the salt oceans and fields of fire ice, Izuku analyzed maps, studied supply chain logistics of the garrison, and theorized about the structural mechanics of ODM gear. His relationship with the trio had solidified into a strange, unbreakable bond forged in shared trauma. Armin was his intellectual partner, Mikasa was his silent confidant. She seemed to understand his quiet burdens without him ever needing to speak of them, her own quiet suffering a mirror to his. And Aaron. Aaron was his greatest challenge, and his most profound worry. The boy's rage had not softened over the years. It had calcified, becoming the bedrock of his entire being. He saw Izuku's obsessive training and analytical mind not as a different path, but as a frustrating distraction from the real goal, killing Titans. The Green Flash incident was a forbidden topic. Eren had tried to bring it up once, a few months after the fall, his eyes wide with a desperate need for answers. Izuku had shut him down gently but firmly, explaining it as a one-time, inexplicable event, a freak accident he couldn't replicate or control. It was a necessary lie, revealing the truth of one for all, of reincarnation, of a world with superpowers, would not only sound insane, it would put a target on his back so large it would cover the entirety of Wall Rose. Eren had reluctantly accepted the answer, but the suspicion never truly left his eyes. He watched Izuku, always watching, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. Now, at 15, they stood on the grounds of the 104th Training Corps. The air was crisp, the sun bright, and the parade ground was filled with the nervous energy of hundreds of new recruits. Before them stood a man who seemed carved from pure intimidation. Commander Keith Shades, the very man who had led the disastrous final expedition from Shiganshina, was now their instructor. His eyes were like chips of granite, and his voice was a roar that could strip paint from a wall. "Right then, you maggots!" Shades bellowed, his gaze sweeping over the terrified recruits. "I am Keith Shades, and I will be the one to break you. For the next 3 years, you will be forged in the fires of hell. We will tear you down, and rebuild you as soldiers, and those of you who survive will become a worthy wall to protect our king, or you will become nothing more than fodder for the Titans. Now, what are your names, and why are you here?" The infamous rite of passage began. Shades moved down the line, his verbal assaults a masterclass in psychological warfare. He tore into a trembling boy from Trost, mocked a nervous girl from Karen's, and paused in front of Armin. "And what do they call you, maggot?" "Armin Arlert, from Shiganshina, sir!" Armin squeaked, his salute trembling. "Arlert, eh? A fool's name! Why is a runt like you here? To help humanity achieve victory, sir!" Armin shouted, his voice cracking. "Is that so? You look like you'd be more useful as Titan bait. Turn around!" Izuku, standing 2 rows back, watched with a detached calm. This was a test. Shades wasn't just being cruel. He was identifying weaknesses, searching for breaking points, gauging resolve. It was brutal, but it had a purpose. Shades moved on, his gaze eventually landing on a tall, lean young man with a disturbingly placid expression. "You! Who are you?" "Reiner Braun, from a small mountain village southeast of Wall Rose, sir." Reiner's voice was steady, his salute perfect. "And why are you here, Braun?" "To dedicate my heart and soul to the king and save humanity, sir." His answer was textbook flawless. Too flawless. Izuku's eyes narrowed. He analyzed Reiner's posture, his diction, the subtle tension in his shoulders. It was the stance of a trained soldier, not a terrified farm boy. He made a mental note. "Reiner Braun, watch him." Shades moved past a lanky, sweating boy named Bertold Hoover and a small, blonde girl named Annie Leonhardt, whose bored, apathetic expression was a shield Izuku recognized all too well. He saw Jean Kirstein's arrogance, Connie Springer's simplistic enthusiasm, and then Sasha Blouse, secretly eating a stolen potato. The scene played out as a morbid comedy, Sasha's punishment of running until sunset a lesson to them all. But throughout the ordeal, Izuku remained perfectly still, his posture immaculate, his expression neutral. When Shades finally reached him, the commander paused, his eyes lingering on Izuku for a beat longer than the others. "And you? I recognize that unruly mop of hair. State your name and purpose." "Izuku Midoriya, from Shiganshina, sir." Izuku's voice was clear and strong, without a hint of fear. He had faced down all for one. Keith Shades, for all his bluster, was just a man. Shades leaned in close, his face inches from Izuku's. "Midoriya. The blacksmith's boy. You were there. I saw you on the boats, a broken mess. Why would someone who has seen that hell firsthand volunteer to go back?" It was a genuine question, not just a verbal jab. Izuku met his gaze without flinching. "Because I have seen what happens when we are not prepared, sir," Izuku replied, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its intensity. "I am here to ensure that what happened to Shiganshina never happens again." I am here to learn how to fight effectively, so that I can protect those who cannot protect themselves. It was the truth, or at least a palatable version of it. The word hero was not in his vocabulary here. Protector was the closest equivalent. A flicker of something, surprise? Respect, passed through Shadi's eyes before being extinguished. He stared at Izuku for a long, silent moment, the entire training ground holding its breath. Then, without another word, he moved on to Eren. The confrontation between Eren and Shadi's was exactly as fiery as Izuku had anticipated. Eren's raw, unfiltered hatred for the Titans poured out of him, a declaration of genocidal intent that made even Shadi's raise an eyebrow. "We'll see," was all the commander said before moving on, leaving Eren trembling with adrenaline. The first true test was the aptitude assessment for the omnidirectional mobility gear. It was a trial of balance and core strength, a simple yet effective way to weed out those who lacked the basic physical requirements. One by one, recruits were hoisted into the air by wires, tasked with simply holding a stable, balanced position. Connie managed it. Jean, with his typical swagger, held his pose perfectly. Mikasa was flawless, a portrait of effortless grace. Then it was Eren's turn. He was hoisted up, and immediately flipped upside down, his head slamming into the ground with a sickening thud. The other recruits snickered. Eren tried again, his face a mask of furious determination, and again he flipped, dangling helplessly. "Jaeger! What is your malfunction?" Shadi's roared. Izuku watched, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive. It wasn't Eren's balance. He'd seen Eren train. His physical aptitude was well above average. It had to be the equipment. He scanned the gear, his eyes tracing the belts, the buckles, the gas mechanisms. And then he saw it. A glint of metal where it shouldn't be. The clasp on Eren's belt, the one connecting to the main support harness, was damaged. It was bent, causing a subtle but critical imbalance. Later that evening, after Eren had endured the humiliation and sought him out for advice, Izuku pointed it out. "It's not you, Eren. It's the gear. Look." He showed him the faulty buckle. "Someone must have dropped it or used it for scrap practice. Request a different set tomorrow. You'll be fine." Eren stared at the buckle, then at Izuku, his expression a mixture of relief and frustration. "How do you always see this stuff?" "I just pay attention," Izuku said with a small shrug. It was another lie of omission. He wasn't just paying attention. He was running constant, high-speed threat assessments and environmental analyses, a habit ingrained in him by a lifetime of war. The next day, with a new set of gear, Eren passed the test, earning a grudging nod from Shadi's and a quiet, "I told you so," from Izuku. The years of training were a delicate, nerve-wracking balancing act for Izuku. He had to be good enough to make it into the top 10, good enough to join the Survey Corps and protect his friends. But he couldn't be too good. He couldn't be the anomaly he truly was. He deliberately held back. In hand-to-hand combat, he was a prodigy. He had the muscle memory of fighting dozens of pro-heroes and villains. He could have easily bested anyone, even Mikasa or Annie. Instead, he allowed himself to be thrown occasionally. He would win most of his spars but make it look like a struggle. Against Reiner, he would exploit the larger boy's momentum, using judo-like throws, but would feign exhaustion afterward. Against Annie, he would mirror her unique, fluid fighting style for a few moments before allowing her to gain the upper hand with a submission hold he could have easily broken. Annie, in particular, watched him with a sharp, calculating gaze. After one sparring session, she cornered him. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" she asked, her voice flat, betraying no emotion. "My father's a blacksmith," Izuku replied smoothly, wiping sweat from his brow. "Taught me a few things about leverage and balance from watching him work the forge." It was a weak explanation, and they both knew it. Annie's eyes narrowed slightly. "You fight like you're from somewhere else." The comment sent a chill down Izuku's spine. He forced a casual laugh. "Well, Shiganshina feels like a different world now, doesn't it?" He managed to deflect the conversation, but he knew he was on her radar, and on Reiner's and Bertolt's as well. The trio of warriors watched him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. He was an outlier, a variable they couldn't account for, and it made them uneasy. His true training happened at night. When the barracks were dark and quiet, he would slip out to the edge of the training grounds. There, under the moon, he practiced. Not fighting. Control. He had discovered that by focusing his will, he could draw out a tiny, minuscule fraction of one for all. 1%. Maybe 2, on a good day. It manifested not as an explosion of power, but as a deep, resonant hum in his muscles. When active, his senses sharpened, his speed increased marginally, and his strength grew just enough to make a difference. But the cost was immense. Even at 1%, his muscles would ache as if corroded by acid. At 2%, sharp, stabbing pains would shoot through his limbs, warning him that his bones were nearing their breaking point. He called it static charge. It wasn't full cowling. It was a dangerous, low-level activation that put his body under constant strain. He learned to use it in tiny, controlled bursts, a half-second flare of 1% to add momentum to his ODM gear, a quarter-second pulse to his legs to land more softly from a height. These were his secrets, his hidden advantages that allowed him to excel without seeming superhuman. He became known for his mind more than his body. His journals, once a private obsession, became a resource for his fellow cadets. He was the professor. He would hold impromptu study sessions, drawing diagrams of tight and weak spots in the dirt. He developed new tactical uses for the ODM gear, using the hooks as grappling points to disarm opponents, using gas bursts to create diversions, theorizing about coordinated aerial formations that were far more complex than the standard curriculum. Armin thrived under his tutelage, his natural strategic genius blossoming once Izuku gave him the confidence to voice his ideas. Jean, though initially resentful of Izuku's quiet competence, slowly came to respect his tactical acumen, often seeking his advice on leadership problems. Even Connie and Sasha would come to him for help, not just with theory, but with practical things like gear maintenance, which Izuku had mastered down to the last screw. He became the unofficial heart of the 104th, a stabilizing force who bridged the gaps between the different cliques. He was Aaron's anchor, Armin's mentor, and a respected peer to the likes of Jean and Marco. He was the calm in the center of their collective storm. But this quiet, controlled existence was a constant strain. The desire to do more, to be more, was a fire he had to constantly bank. During Titan killing practice on the wooden effigies, he had to force himself to use the standard sword techniques, to aim for the nape like everyone else, when every fiber of his being screamed to just obliterate the entire dummy with a 5% Detroit smash. He felt like a caged lion, pacing the confines of his own self-imposed limitations, all while knowing the jungle outside was burning. The day of graduation arrived. The top 10 cadets were announced. 10th, Krista Lenz. 9th, Sasha Blouse. 8th, Connie Springer. 7th, Marco Bott. 6th, Jean Kirstein. 5th, Aaron Yeager. 4th, Annie Leonhardt. 3rd, Bertolt Hoover. 2nd, Rainer Braun. Commander Shadi's paused before announcing the top graduate. The entire corps looked at Mikasa, the undisputed prodigy. In the number 1 spot, Shadi's announced, his voice echoing across the field. There is a tie. A murmur went through the crowd. Mikasa Ackerman. For her unprecedented, perfect scores in every practical evaluation. He then turned his gaze directly to Izuku. And Izuku Midoriya, for achieving near-perfect scores in practicals, and the highest theoretical and strategic assessment scores in the history of the training corps. A stunned silence fell. Izuku had done it. He had walked the tightrope perfectly. Good enough to be the best, but not in a way that screamed superhuman. He had used his mind as his primary weapon, his intelligence as the justification for his excellence. Mikasa gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod of respect. Aaron clapped him on the back, a wide, proud grin on his face. See? All that time with your nose in a book paid off, Professor. That night, on the eve of their decision, the graduates celebrated. It was a loud, boisterous affair fueled by relief and nervous energy. Most of them, including Jean, were talking about their cushy futures in the military police. Aaron, of course, shattered the comfortable atmosphere with his furious speech, shaming them for their cowardice and rededicating himself to the Survey Corps. The speech was just as powerful and divisive as Izuku remembered it would be. It swayed some, Thomas, Mina, and a few others. Later, Izuku found Eren standing alone on the battlements, staring out at the darkened land beyond Wall Rose. "You didn't have to do that," Izuku said, coming to stand beside him. "Yes, I did," Eren retorted, not looking at him. "They need to be reminded of what's at stake. Of what we lost. You can't force people to be brave, Eren. You can only inspire them. There's a difference, is there?" Eren finally turned to him, his teal eyes burning with an intensity that was almost frightening. 5 years, Izuku. 5 years, and I still see it every time I close my eyes. My mother, that Titan's smile. He trailed off, his jaw tight. "You did something that day. Something impossible. And you've spent 5 years pretending it never happened. You train harder than anyone, you're smarter than anyone, but you always hold back. It's like you're afraid of something." "What are you afraid of, Izuku?" The question hung in the cold night air. Izuku looked at his friend, this boy who was a powder keg of trauma and rage, just waiting for a spark. He wanted to tell him everything. He wanted to share the burden of his past, of one for all. But he couldn't. Eren wouldn't understand. And in his rage, what would he do with that knowledge? Demand the power for himself? See Izuku as another obstacle? "I'm afraid of failing," Izuku said, the words tasting like ash. It was the deepest truth he could offer. "I'm afraid that when the moment comes, my strength won't be enough." Again, the honesty seemed to disarm Eren. The anger in his eyes softened, replaced by a flicker of understanding. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." The moment of peace was shattered by a sound that echoed Izuku's deepest nightmares. A sudden, blinding flash of yellow lightning, striking the top of Wall Rose just outside the city of Trost. It was the exact same phenomenon, the exact same impossible herald, that had announced the end of their world 5 years ago. A wave of cold dread washed over Izuku. "No. Not now. We're not ready." He and Eren stared in horror as a familiar, skinless head rose above the 50-meter wall. The colossal titan had returned. Its arms swung, not at the gate this time, but at the cannons lining the top of the wall. They were swept away like children's toys, exploding into showers of metal and stone. The cadets, moments ago celebrating their graduation, now stared up in abject terror. Their training was over. The real war, the one Izuku had been preparing for and dreading in equal measure, had just begun. Panic erupted. Soldiers scrambled, orders were screamed. The new graduates of the 104th, their faces pale with shock, were thrust directly from the frying pan into the inferno. Eren was the first to move, launching himself towards the chaos with his ODM gear, a battle cry on his lips. Mikasa followed a moment later, a silent shadow of lethal intent. Izuku stood frozen for a single, critical second. His carefully constructed balance was shattered. The life of a quiet, intellectual cadet was over. The time for holding back was gone. He watched Eren charge headfirst towards the colossal titan, a beacon of pure, suicidal rage. He saw his other friends, Thomas, Connie, Sasha, Armin, paralyzed by a fear so profound it was almost tangible. He felt the familiar, acidic burn of desperation rise in his throat. His internal debate was a silent, lightning-fast war. Reveal your power, and you become a target for whatever force is behind this. Hold back and your friends will die. The choice was no choice at all. He had lived one life defined by the mantra, meddle when you don't need to. He would not abandon it now. The colossal titan let out a huge cloud of scalding steam, forcing Eren back. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving a gaping, smoking hole in the gate of Trost district. And through that hole, the titans began to pour in. "The plan is in effect!" a garrison officer screamed. "All cadets to the front lines! Engage the enemy! Protect the evacuation!" The 104th, their faces a mixture of terror and grim resolve, launched into the city. Izuku took a deep, shuddering breath. He felt the low hum of static charge begin to build in his limbs, the familiar pain a welcome anchor in the chaos. He watched Eren's squad take point, charging into the fray. He saw Mikasa being redirected to the rear guard to protect the civilians. He saw Armin, trembling, trying to keep his squad together. and he saw a small, pigtailed girl from his squad, Mina Carolina, her eyes wide with fear as a 10-meter abnormal titan changed direction, lunging directly for her. She was frozen. She was going to die. There was no more time for hesitation. No more holding back. Izuku grit his teeth, the pain flaring hot and sharp in his legs. He pushed past the 2% barrier he had so carefully maintained. 3%. 4. 5. The pain was a shriek in his mind, but he grit his teeth and pushed through it. Full cowling, 8%. Green lightning, brighter and more vibrant than ever before, erupted around his body, wrapping him in a crackling sheath of pure power. He shot forward, a streak of emerald light. He was faster than a cannonball, faster than any human had a right to be. He intercepted the abnormal titan mid-lunge, his ODM gear firing to give him purchase on a nearby wall. He didn't even draw his blades. He pivoted in midair, his leg a blur, and delivered a powerful, spinning kick to the side of the titan's head. Shoot style, St. Louis smash. The impact was like a thunderclap. The titan's head didn't just deform, it exploded in a shower of gore and vaporized bone. The headless body crashed into the street, already dissolving into steam. Izuku landed silently on a nearby rooftop, the green aura of full cowling flickering around him, his body screaming in agony from the strain. The other cadets in his vicinity stared, their jaws hanging open in stunned disbelief. He ignored them. His eyes scanned the battlefield. He saw Aaron's squad, overwhelmed. He saw Thomas Wagner snatched from the air. He saw Aaron, consumed by rage, charge forward only to have his leg bitten off. He saw the rest of the squad, including Armin, being picked off one by one. He saw Aaron, in a final, desperate act, sacrifice himself to save Armin from the gullet of a bearded titan. The sight hit him with the force of a physical blow. Aaron, across the city, on another rooftop, Mikasa ran out of gas. She fell, crashing into the alleys below, her mind broken by the news of Aaron's death. 2 titans began to close in on her position. Izuku saw it all. In the space of a few heartbeats, he had seen his best friend devoured and his other closest friend about to follow. The carefully constructed walls around his heart, the 5 years of restraint, the fear of revealing himself, it all crumbled to dust. The ghosts of his past roared in his mind. Save them! His grief and fury were a tidal wave. He pushed his power higher, ignoring the tearing sensation in his muscles. 10%. 12. The green light around him flared, becoming a blinding beacon in the smoky, blood-soaked city. He looked towards Mikasa's position. He looked at the horde of titans now swarming the streets. There was no more holding back. There was no more hiding. He was Izuku Midoriya. He was the 9th holder of One for All. He was a hero. And his friends were in danger. He crouched, the rooftop cracking under the sheer pressure of his power, and launched himself into the sky. The world had narrowed to a single, screaming point of focus. All the training, all the agonizing restraint, all the carefully constructed lies of the past 5 years, they were incinerated in the crucible of this single, horrific moment. Aaron was gone. Devoured. And Mikasa, broken by the news, was about to follow him into the maw of oblivion. The pain of 12% full cowling was a fire consuming Izuku's body from the inside out. It felt as though his very cells were being torn asunder by the raw, untamed power he was channeling. His muscles, painstakingly conditioned but still fundamentally human, shrieked in protest. His bones groaned under a strain they were never meant to bear. But the physical agony was a distant echo compared to the psychic anguish of watching his friends die. Again. No. The word was a silent, ironclad vow. He landed on a rooftop overlooking the alley where Mikasa had fallen. The scene below was a portrait of impending doom. She was on her knees, her blades broken, her ODM gear out of gas, her face a mask of utter despair. She had given up. 2 titans, one a lanky 7-meter class and the other a squat 5-meter, were converging on her, their mindless grins a mockery of the tragedy about to unfold. There was no time for a plan. There was only time for action. Mikasa! His voice, amplified by the sheer power coursing through him, boomed across the rooftops like a thunderclap. She looked up, her dead eyes widening slightly as she saw him. He was no longer the calm, analytical boy she knew. He was a figure wreathed in a storm of jagged, emerald lightning, his green eyes blazing with an intensity that burned away the shadows. He didn't wait for her to respond. He launched himself from the rooftop, not with his gear, but with a pure, explosive leap. He covered the 50-foot distance in the blink of an eye, a living cannonball of green fury. He descended upon the 5-meter Titan first. He didn't use his blades. They were too slow, too inefficient. His own body was the weapon. Shoot style, Manchester smash. He brought his leg down in a devastating axe kick, his heel connecting with the crown of the Titan's skull. The power of a 12% smash, concentrated into the point of his boot, was absolute. The Titan's head didn't just crack, it imploded. The force of the blow traveled down its spine like a shockwave, and its entire torso burst apart in a shower of gore and steaming viscera. It was dead before its knees even buckled. He used the momentum of the kick to pivot in midair, his other foot lashing out at the 7-meter Titan that was reaching for Mikasa. The kick, less focused but no less powerful, struck it squarely in the chest. There was a wet, concussive crunch, and the Titan's entire ribcage shattered inward, the force of the blow turning its internal organs to pulp. It was thrown backward, crashing through the wall of a nearby building before slumping to the ground, its life extinguished. Izuku landed softly between Mikasa and the dissolving corpses, the green lightning of full cowling still crackling around him. The alley was suddenly, unnervingly silent, save for the hiss of evaporating Titan flesh. Izuku! Mikasa breathed, her voice barely a whisper. She stared at him, at the impossible power radiating from him, her mind struggling to reconcile this divine, wrathful being with the quiet, kind boy who used to help her carry firewood. It's okay, Izuku said, his voice strained from the pain but his tone firm and reassuring. I'm here. I'm not letting anyone else die today. He offered her a hand. His own was trembling, not from fear, but from the immense strain of his power. She took it, her fingers cold and limp. He pulled her to her feet, his eyes scanning their surroundings. More Titans were lumbering down the main thoroughfare, drawn by the commotion. Your gear is empty, he stated, his mind already calculating their next move. Mine's still good. Get on my back. We need to get you to the supply depot at HQ. She was too stunned to argue. She complied numbly, wrapping her arms around his neck as he positioned her on his back. Her weight was negligible to him in his enhanced state. Hold on tight, he warned. With Mikasa secure, he fired his ODM hooks into a high rooftop and engaged the gas. The burst of speed was compounded tenfold by a 10% kickoff from the ground. They didn't just ascend, they rocketed into the air, a green blur against the gray, smoky sky. From this new vantage point, Izuku could see the full scope of the disaster. Trost was a war zone. Pockets of soldiers were fighting desperate, losing battles all over the district. The civilian evacuation was stalled. The vanguard forces, including what was left of Aaron's squad, had been all but annihilated. A cold, hard fury settled in his heart. This was no longer just about saving Mikasa. This was about saving everyone. Mikasa, he said, his voice cutting through the wind. When we get to HQ, refuel, rearm, and help coordinate the defense. Get the survivors to fall back. I'll clear a path. Clear a path? She asked, her voice still faint. Izuku, there are dozens of them. He didn't answer with words. He answered with action. He spotted a cluster of 3 Titans, a 4-meter, a 6-meter, and another 7-meter, cornering a small group of terrified garrison soldiers. The soldiers were out of gas, their blades broken, their faces pale with the acceptance of their own imminent deaths. Izuku adjusted his trajectory, angling towards them. He released his hooks, letting them fall. For a moment, they were in a controlled freefall. Then, he activated one for all in a series of controlled, directional bursts. Air Force. It was a technique he'd barely practiced, a high-risk maneuver he theorized but never attempted under real-world conditions. He shot out a tiny, concentrated blast of air pressure from the sole of his boot, altering their trajectory to the right. Another blast, this one from his fist, corrected their spin. He was no longer just using the ODM gear. He was flying, using his own power as a propulsion system. He zipped over the heads of the cornered soldiers, drawing the Titan's attention. He landed on a rooftop across the street, gently setting Mikasa down. Stay here for a second. Before she could protest, he was gone again, a green thunderbolt streaking towards the three titans. He moved with a speed and fluidity that was utterly alien to this world. He ran along the side of a building, defying gravity, his feet kicking off windowsills as he built up momentum. He launched himself at the 4-meter, his fist pulled back. Delaware smash! He didn't even make contact. He flicked his finger, releasing a compressed air cannonball that struck the titan in the face. The shockwave pulped its head and sent its body tumbling backward. He used the recoil from the Air Force blast to spin, firing his hooks into the 7-meter. He reeled himself in, but instead of using his blades, he ran up its outstretched arm, his boots cracking its skin with every step. He reached its shoulder, leaped high into the air, and brought his heel down on its nape. Another Manchester smash, and another titan dissolved into steam. The last one, the 6-meter, turned to face him, its mouth agape. Izuku simply pointed his hand at it. He couldn't afford the strain of another high-percentage smash, but he didn't need one. He focused a tiny sliver of OFA into his fingertips. 5 miniature Delaware smashes went off in rapid succession, like machine gun fire. The compressed air bullets were less powerful than a full-power smash, but they were more than enough. They riddled the titan's face and chest, staggering it, and one found its mark in the weak spot of its nape, ending it. The cornered garrison soldiers stared, their mouths hanging open. They had just witnessed one boy kill 3 titans in less than 10 seconds, barely using his blades. What is that? One of them stammered. An older soldier, his face grimy and blood-streaked, squinted. I saw something like that once, 5 years ago. In Shiganshina. The green flash, the name, spoken aloud, hung in the air, filled with a new, terrifying significance. Izuku returned to Mikasa's side, his breathing heavy, the green aura around him flickering erratically. The pain was becoming a roaring inferno. He could feel micro-tears forming in his muscles. He was running on borrowed time. Let's go! He grunted, pulling her back onto his back and launching them toward the monolithic garrison HQ. Far above the chaos, perched on the highest point of Wall Rose, another battle was being observed. Captain Levi Ackerman, humanity's strongest soldier, stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold indifference. His elite squad stood behind him, their expressions equally grim. They had just returned from an expedition beyond the walls, only to find the walls themselves had failed. He's making a mockery of them, Ld Jin observed, his eyes wide with disbelief as he watched the distant green blur carve a path of destruction through the Titan horde. His control of the ODM gear is impossible, Gunther Schultz added, his brow furrowed. He's not just swinging. He's flying. Forget the gear, Petra Rao said, her voice filled with awe and a hint of fear. He's killing them with his bare hands. Captain, what are we seeing? Levi said nothing. His steel-gray eyes, sharp and analytical, missed nothing. He had seen the boy, because he was clearly just a boy, erupt in a flash of green light. He had seen him move with a speed that surpassed even his own. He had seen him kill titans not with the practiced, precise slashes of a soldier, but with the raw, overwhelming force of a natural disaster. This wasn't a soldier. Soldiers fought with discipline, with strategy, with blades honed to kill. This boy fought like a titan himself, a whirlwind of inexplicable power. He was an anomaly, an unknown variable, and in Levi's world, the unknown was the deadliest threat of all. He's a monster, Aluo Bozado declared, trying to mimic Levi's stoic demeanor and nearly biting his tongue in the process. Perhaps one of theirs? Levi's gaze sharpened. That was the logical, terrifying conclusion. A new type of Titan shifter, one with powers that dwarfed the colossal and the armored. But it didn't feel right. The boy's movements, his actions, they weren't aimed at destruction. He was actively saving people. He was clearing a path to the HQ, taking out any Titan that threatened a group of soldiers. His actions were reckless, brutally efficient, but they were undeniably heroic. Get ready to move, Levi said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. We're going down there. I want to see this monster, up close. Izuku crashed through the main window of the garrison HQ supply depot, landing in a shower of glass. He gently set Mikasa down before collapsing to one knee, the 12% full cowling finally receding, leaving behind a body screaming in protest. His limbs trembled violently, and a wave of nausea and dizziness washed over him. The room was in chaos. Dozens of terrified recruits were huddled together, paralyzed by fear, while the supply team frantically tried to fend off the titans that had smashed their way into the lower levels. "Mikasa!" Armin's voice cried out, relief flooding his face as he saw her. He ran to her, his eyes wide with terror and questions. Her arrival, along with the news that the vanguard had been wiped out, sent a fresh wave of despair through the recruits. But Mikasa was no longer the broken girl from the alley. She had seen the impossible. She had been carried on the back of hope itself. Her eyes were clear and sharp. "It's not over," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound authority as she began to reload her gas tanks. "We fight. Or we die. There is no other choice." Inspired by her sudden resolve, Jean Kirstein, after a moment of panicked hesitation, stepped up. He rallied the terrified recruits, formulating a plan to retake the supply room. Izuku, meanwhile, was fighting his own battle. He forced himself to his feet, leaning against a pillar to stay upright. The vestiges were whispering in his mind again, their voices a cacophony of warning. "Danger, ninth! Not from the giants, eyes are upon you. The other one. The strong one." He knew what they meant. He could feel it. A presence. A gaze from above that was as sharp and dangerous as any titan. Before he could process the warning, the plan to retake the supply room was interrupted by a new, earth-shattering development. A 15-meter titan with shaggy brown hair and piercing green eyes appeared in the street outside. But this one was different. It ignored the humans. It launched itself at the other titans, its movements filled with a savage, intelligent rage. It crushed a titan's nape with its fist. It bit another's head off. It fought with a brutal efficiency that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Armin stared, his brilliant mind putting the pieces together. A titan, fighting other titans? An abnormal that could be our ally? Izuku knew better. He could feel it. A flicker of something familiar deep within the rogue titan's core. It was a faint, corrupted echo of the same energy that powered One for All. It was raw will, given form, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, who it had to be: Eren. The battle for Trost had just become infinitely more complicated. The rogue titan, Eren, was clearing a path, but his rampage was drawing even more titans to the HQ. The plan to retake the depot was launched. 7 of the best and brightest, including Mikasa, Reiner, Jean, and Annie, shot out to act as bait, while 2 others, Connie and Sasha, took out the titans in the supply room with precise thunder spears they had just been shown. The plan worked. The room was secured. But the celebration was cut short as the rogue titan, its body battered and its energy spent, was overwhelmed and devoured by a swarm of other titans. Just as despair began to set in again, a figure emerged from the steam of the dissolving titan's nape. Battered, unconscious, missing an arm and a leg that were already regenerating with faint wisps of steam, was Eren Yeager. The secret was out. Humanity had a weapon. A human who could turn into a titan. And as the garrison soldiers surrounded the unconscious Eren, their cannons aimed, their faces a mixture of fear and hatred, a new presence made itself known. With a whisper of gas and a blur of motion, the Survey Corps elite descended from the sky. They landed silently on the surrounding rooftops, their green wings of freedom cloaks billowing in the wind. And at their head, landing directly on the lip of the wall above the standoff, was Captain Levi. His gaze swept over the scene with cold, dismissive authority. He saw the cannons, the terrified soldiers, the regenerating boy, the steaming titan corpse. Then, his eyes locked onto the figure standing shakily in the now open doorway of the supply depot. The boy wreathed in fading green sparks. The 2 most powerful forces on Parity Island, the 2 poles of humanity's fight for survival, were finally face to face. On one side stood Levi Ackerman, humanity's strongest soldier. The product of a brutal, unforgiving world. He was a scalpel, a blade honed to perfection, designed for one purpose: to kill titans with ruthless, detached efficiency. His strength was born of discipline, training, and a hardened, cynical view of the world. He was the embodiment of humanity's grim, bloody struggle for survival. On the other stood Izuku Midoriya, a ghost from another world. He was not a soldier. He was a hero. His power was not a skill to be learned but a sacred fire passed down through generations. His strength was born of empathy, of a burning, indomitable will to save everyone, to protect the innocent at any cost. He was not a weapon of survival. He was a symbol of hope. The soldiers on the ground felt the shift in the atmosphere. The tension crackled between the boy on the ground and the man on the wall. A garrison soldier, one of the men Izuku had saved earlier, pointed a trembling finger at him. "That's him!" the soldier shouted, his voice filled with a frantic awe. "He's like Captain Levi! He's humanity's strongest!" Another voice, a refugee from the evacuation boats who had seen both the fall of Shiganshina and the defense of Trost, yelled back, his voice thick with emotion. "No! You're wrong! I saw him at Shiganshina. He's not a soldier. A soldier kills. He saves. He's not humanity's strongest. He's the Green Flash. He's our hope." The two titles, thrown out into the blood-soaked air, hung there, defining the two figures. Humanity's strongest versus humanity's hope. The cynic versus the idealist. The killer versus the savior. Levi's cold, gray eyes narrowed, boring into Izuku. He saw the trembling limbs, the fading green sparks, the sheer exhaustion on the boy's face. But he also saw the defiance in his eyes, the unwavering resolve of someone who had just stared into the abyss and spat in its face. This boy was not just a monster or an anomaly. He was a power that threatened to rewrite all the rules of their miserable existence. And Levi wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a very, very bad one. The chapter ended there, on that silent, charged confrontation. The battle for Trost was over, but a new, more complex conflict was just beginning. The question was no longer just how to survive the Titans. It was what to do with the two boys, the monster and the hero, who had just changed the very nature of the war. The silence in the aftermath of the battle was more profound than the preceding chaos. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from shock, exhaustion, and a dawning, terrifying uncertainty. The air, thick with the metallic tang of blood and the sweet, sickly scent of evaporating Titan flesh, was still. The surviving soldiers and cadets of the 104th stood frozen, their gazes shifting between the three focal points of this new, unbelievable reality: the unconscious, regenerating form of Eren Yeager, the cold, imposing figure of Captain Levi perched atop the wall, and the boy wreathed in fading emerald sparks, Izuku Midoriya, who stood trembling but defiant in the doorway of the garrison headquarters. For Izuku, the world was a swimming gray haze. The adrenaline that had fueled his impossible feats was draining away, leaving behind a chasm of agony. His body, pushed far beyond any reasonable limit, was staging a full-scale rebellion. Every muscle fiber felt as if it had been shredded and set alight. His bones ached with a deep, resonant thrum of near fractures, and a wave of profound nausea threatened to buckle his knees. The 12% full calling had saved lives, but the price was a physical debt he was only now beginning to pay. His fading power was the only thing holding him upright. He locked eyes with Captain Levi, and in that gaze he felt a different kind of threat. It wasn't the mindless hunger of a Titan, but the sharp, piercing threat of a predator sizing up an unknown creature in its territory. Levi's eyes were devoid of awe. They held only suspicion and a cold, calculating assessment. Izuku knew, with a certainty that cut through his pain-fogged mind, that this man was more dangerous to him than any Titan he had faced today. The standoff was broken by the clatter of boots and the barked orders of garrison officers. Commander Kitswarman, a man whose mustache seemed to perpetually tremble with fear and paranoia, stepped forward. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a terror that was rapidly curdling into aggression. "Seize them!" Warman shrieked, his voice a high-pitched instrument of panic. He pointed a trembling finger not just at the unconscious Eren, but at Izuku as well. "Both of them! They are not human! They are monsters! Threats to us all!" The garrison soldiers, their nerves already frayed to the breaking point, reacted instantly. Rifles were raised, blades were drawn. They formed a nervous, aggressive circle, their weapons aimed at the two boys who had, moments before, saved their lives. Mikasa and Armin moved instantly to shield Eren's body, their faces etched with fierce defiance. But Izuku stood his ground. He held up a hand, not in surrender, but as a plea for calm. "Stand down," Izuku said, his voice raspy and strained, but carrying an unnatural weight of authority. "We are not your enemy." "Silence, monster!" Warman spat, spittle flying from his lips. "You think we didn't see you? Flying through the air like some demon? Leveling titans with your bare hands? That is not human strength. You are an accomplice to that thing." He gestured wildly at Eren. "Prepare the cannons. We will eradicate this threat before it destroys us all." The situation was escalating, spiraling into a vortex of fear and paranoia. Izuku knew he couldn't fight them. Not in his current state. More importantly, he wouldn't fight them. These were the very people he was trying to protect. Attacking them would validate every one of their fears. Before Warman could give the final order, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Kits." Pixis, commander of the garrison for the Southern Territory, stood on the wall beside Levi, having arrived with the Survey Corps elite. His bald head and kindly, wrinkled face belied an iron will and a keen strategic mind. He descended via his ODM gear, landing with a soft thud that seemed to command more authority than Warman's frantic screaming. "These boys just played an instrumental role in preventing the complete overrun of Trost," Pixis said, his eyes twinkling as he surveyed the scene. "I think summary execution might be a tad hasty, don't you?" Levi dropped from the wall, landing as silently as a cat. He walked past the garrison soldiers as if they were nothing more than furniture, his gaze never leaving Izuku. He stopped a few feet away, his arms crossed. "Two new toys," Levi said, his voice flat and bored, yet carrying an undercurrent of immense menace. "One turns into a titan, the other glows." "Explain." It wasn't a request. It was a demand. The decision was ultimately made by Pixis, with the silent, intimidating backing of Levi and Commander Erwin Smith, who had now joined them. The two boys were to be taken into custody, not as prisoners of war, but as assets to be evaluated. They were both disarmed, and Izuku, his power finally fading completely, slumped forward, caught by two garrison soldiers who handled him as if he were a live bomb. The world dissolved into a series of pained, hazy vignettes. The cold stone of a dungeon wall. The clanging of a heavy iron door. The rough fabric of a prison uniform. He was separated from Eren, placed in a solitary cell deep beneath the courthouse. The darkness was a welcome relief, a chance for his body to finally begin the agonizing process of healing and for his mind to try and piece together the shattered remnants of his carefully laid plans. He had failed. He had kept his secret for 5 years, only to have it blow up in the most spectacular way possible. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, top cadet. He was an anomaly, a monster, a problem to be solved. And he had dragged Eren down with him. His interrogation came first. The room was sparse, a single table and 3 chairs illuminated by a single, harsh lamp. Seated across from him were the 3 most powerful men within the walls. Commander-in-Chief Darius Zackley, a man whose face was a mask of cold, impartial judgment. Commander Erwin Smith of the Survey Corps, his intelligent blue eyes holding a deep, unnerving curiosity, and Commander Pixis, who observed him with a grandfatherly yet shrewd gaze. And leaning against the back wall, his arms crossed, his face shrouded in shadow, was Captain Levi. A silent, deadly juror. "Izuku Midoriya," Zackley began, his voice dry as dust. "Ranked first in the 104th Training Corps. A model cadet. And, as of this morning, an entity capable of superhuman feats of strength and speed. You will tell us everything. What are you? And where does this power come from?" Izuku took a slow, deep breath, centering himself. The pain was still a constant, throbbing companion, but his mind was clear. He had spent hours in his cell running through this exact scenario, analyzing potential outcomes, formulating his strategy. He couldn't tell them the truth. The concept of reincarnation, of other worlds, of superpowers called quirks, was so far beyond their understanding it would be dismissed as the ravings of a lunatic, or, worse, the elaborate lies of an enemy agent. He needed a plausible, if incomplete, explanation. "My name is Izuku Midoriya," he began, his voice steady. I am a human being born in Shiganshina. The power you saw, it is not something I fully understand myself. It is a family heirloom. The three commanders exchanged glances. Levi remained motionless in the shadows. An heirloom? Owen asked, leaning forward, his interest piqued. Explain what you mean by that. It is a power that is passed down, Izuku said, choosing his words with surgical precision. He was weaving a narrative that was true from a certain point of view. A latent ability that lies dormant in my family's bloodline. It only awakens under conditions of extreme trauma and stress. The first time it appeared was during the fall of Shiganshina. The second time was this morning, when I saw my comrades being slaughtered. It was a brilliant half-truth. It framed one for all not as an external power he had inherited, but as an innate, genetic trait, something more akin to the Ackerman clan's abilities, a concept they could, perhaps, begin to grasp. And this heirloom allows you to move faster than a speeding horse and punch a titan's head into mist? Zachary asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. Yes, sir, Izuku replied calmly. But it comes at a great cost. As you can see, he gestured to his still trembling hands. My body is not equipped to handle it. Using it is self-destructive. It is a last resort, an act of desperation, not a tool I can use at will. This, at least, was completely true. Pixis stroked his chin. A fascinating tale, young man. It almost sounds like the legends of the old gods. But it doesn't explain the other one. The Jaeger boy. What is your connection to him? Are your powers related? This was the critical juncture. He had to separate himself from Eren, to establish them as two distinct phenomena, while simultaneously arguing for Eren's value. None whatsoever, Izuku said firmly. I have known Eren Jaeger my entire life. I had no knowledge of his ability until I saw him emerge from the Titan's nape, just like the rest of you. As far as I can tell, our abilities are entirely unrelated. His seems to be a form of transformation. Mine is an enhancement. We are two separate, inexplicable events that happen to occur in the same place, at the same time. Erwin Smith's gaze was intense, analytical. He wasn't just listening to the words. He was reading Izuku's body language, his tone, his choice of phrasing. You seem to have given this a great deal of thought, Midoriya. You speak not like a frightened boy, but like a military strategist. I've had a lot of time to think, sir, Izuku replied. And what I've concluded is that what happened in Tros presents humanity with an unprecedented opportunity. He leaned forward, his green eyes burning with a passion he could no longer conceal. For 100 years, we have been on the defensive. We have been livestock, waiting for the slaughter. We fight the Titans, but we do not understand them. Where do they come from? Why do they eat us? How can we permanently defeat them? We have no answers. But Eren Jaeger. Eren is an answer. He is a key, a living Rosetta Stone to understanding our greatest enemy. He had their full attention now. Even Levi shifted slightly, his head tilting. Eren is not just a weapon to be pointed at the enemy, Izuku continued, his voice gaining strength. He is a source of intelligence that is more valuable than 1,000 soldiers. By studying him, by learning how he transforms, by accessing his memories, if possible, we could learn everything. We could learn their weaknesses, their origins, perhaps even their ultimate goal. His strategic value is incalculable. To execute him would be like finding the map to a treasure chest and setting it on fire because you're afraid of pirates. He leaned back, his point made. He had shifted the entire paradigm. He had taken their fear of Eren the monster and reframed it as the potential of Eren the solution. A long silence filled the room. Zachary looked at Erwin, whose expression was unreadable. Pixis was smiling faintly. He makes a compelling argument, Erwin, Pixis said. Erwin nodded slowly. Indeed. His intellect is as formidable as his strength. He turned his gaze back to Izuku. You advocate for the boy's strategic value. But what of you? If we were to entrust Eren Jaeger to the Survey Corps, what role would you play? My role is the same as it has always been, Izuku said. To protect humanity. If you believe Eren is a key, then he is the most valuable asset we have. And he will be a target, not just from the Titans, but potentially from whatever human forces are behind them. He will need a guardian. A shield. Someone who can neutralize threats that his Titan form cannot. I can be that shield. From the back of the room, Levi finally spoke, his voice cutting through the air like cold steel. You talk a good game, brat. But all I see is an unstable, unknown power. You're a bigger monster than he is. How do we know we can control you? Izuku turned his head to face the shadowy figure. You can't, he said, his honesty stark and unwavering. You can't control me, Captain. No more than you can control a hurricane, but you can point me in the direction of the enemy, and know that I will do everything in my power to protect the people behind me. I am not a tool to be controlled. I am a soldier who has sworn to protect his people. My loyalty is not in question. Levi pushed himself off the wall and walked into the light. He circled the table until he stood directly behind Izuku, looming over him. Izuku could feel the captain's intense, suffocating presence. Loyalty can be a fragile thing, Levi whispered, his voice dangerously low. Mine is not, Izuku replied, without turning around. The tension was broken by Erwin Smith, who stood up. Thank you, Midoriya. That will be all. You will be returned to your cell. As he was led out, Izuku felt a sliver of hope. He had planted the seed. He had given Erwin, a man known for his high-risk, high-reward gambles, a gambit he couldn't possibly ignore. The trial itself was a circus of fear. It was held in a massive, fortified courtroom packed with members of the military police, the garrison, and wealthy merchants, all clamoring for blood. Eren, now conscious and fully healed, was shackled to a pole in the center of the room, looking bewildered and terrified. Izuku was placed in a heavily guarded dock to the side, a silent observer. The prosecution, led by the military police, painted a picture of apocalyptic threat. They spoke of Eren's Titan form destroying property, of his instability, of the danger he posed to the king and the peaceful order within the walls. They then turned on Izuku, their voices dripping with venom. And this other one? The prosecutor, a slick man from the interior police, sneered, pointing at Izuku. This green flash. He possesses a power that makes a mockery of our military, a power he has hidden for years. He is a liar, a deceiver. Who's to say he is not the master and the Jaeger boy merely his puppet? We demand their immediate dissection and study, for the good of humanity. The crowd roared its approval. Eren looked desperately at Izuku, his eyes pleading for help. Izuku simply gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Trust me. Then, Erwin Smith was called to speak. He strode to the center of the room, his presence commanding immediate silence. He laid out his proposal, his voice calm and reasonable. The Survey Corps will take custody of Eren Yeager, he declared. We will utilize his Titan ability on our next mission to retake Wall Maria. His success or failure will determine his ultimate value. The courtroom erupted in protest. The idea of unleashing a Titan, even a controlled one, was madness to them. And what of the other one? Zackley demanded from his high seat. What is your proposal for the Midoriya boy, Izuku Midoriya? Owen said, turning slightly to acknowledge him. Will also be placed under the command of the Survey Corps. He will be assigned, along with Eren Yeager, to the Special Operations Squad, under the direct supervision of Captain Levi. This caused an even greater uproar. To place these two monsters under the command of one man, even humanity's strongest, seemed like a monumental risk. Eren, seeing his chance, found his voice. I can do it! He shouted, his voice filled with a desperate passion. I can control my power! I am not your enemy! I am. His passionate declaration was cut short. In a blur of motion too fast for most to follow, Levi had crossed the room and delivered a brutal kick to Eren's face, snapping his head back and sending a tooth flying. The courtroom gasped. Levi didn't stop. He stomped on Eren's head, grinding his face into the stone floor, raining down a series of vicious, calculated blows. You see, Levi said, his voice cold and bored as he brutalized the shackled boy. Pain and discipline are the only things you can truly count on. He may be a monster, but I can control him. Izuku watched, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. He understood what Levi was doing. It was a piece of brutal, political theater. A demonstration. He was showing the terrified court that he was not afraid of Eren, that he could and would put the monster down if necessary. It was a savage, but effective, way to assert dominance and reassure the frightened masses. But understanding it didn't make it any easier to watch. Every instinct in Izuku's body screamed at him to intervene, to stop this. But he forced himself to remain still. This was part of Erwin's plan. Interfering now would undo everything. After the brutal beating, Zackley made his decision. My mind is made up. Custody of both Eren Yeager and Izuku Midoriya will be granted to the Survey Corps. This court is adjourned. Later, in the quiet solitude of the dungeon, the two boys were reunited. Eren's face was swollen and bruised, but his missing tooth had already regrown. He sat on the edge of his cot, his head in his hands. He didn't have to do that, Eren muttered, his voice thick with humiliation. Izuku sat down beside him, the aches in his own body a dull, constant reminder of his own ordeal. Yes, he did, Eren. Eren looked up, his eyes flashing with anger. What are you talking about? He beat me half to death in front of everyone. He was putting on a show. Izuku explained patiently, his voice low. The people in that courtroom weren't thinking logically. They were terrified. They see you as an uncontrollable monster. Captain Levi gave them a performance to show them that you can be controlled. He took their fear and directed it at himself. It was a calculated risk to save your life. He took the role of the bigger, scarier monster so they'd be willing to hand you over. Eren stared at him, the anger in his eyes slowly being replaced by a dawning, reluctant understanding. You figured all that out, just from watching? It was the most logical move, Izuku said with a shrug. Erwin provided the plan, and Levi provided the necessary theatrics to make it palatable. It was a smart play. Eren was silent for a long moment, processing. So we're in the Survey Corps now. Under him. He shuddered slightly. What happens now, Izuku? Izuku looked at his friend. He saw the fear, the confusion, the burden of a power Eren never asked for. He felt a profound sense of responsibility, a familiar weight settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just Eren's friend. He was his guide. His protector. His mentor. He placed a reassuring hand on Eren's shoulder. Now we do what we always planned to do. We fight. We find answers. You have a power that can change the course of this war, Eren, but you don't know how to use it yet. It's wild, driven by your rage. I'll help you. Izuku continued, his voice firm, unwavering. We'll figure it out together. We'll learn how to control it, how to master it. We'll find out why you have this power and where it came from. You're not a monster, Eren. You're humanity's greatest weapon. And I'm not going to let you face this alone. Eren looked at Izuku, at the absolute conviction in his green eyes. For the first time since he had woken up in a cloud of steam, a flicker of hope ignited in Eren's heart. He wasn't alone. He had Armin's intellect, Mikasa's devotion, and now, he had Izuku's strength and unwavering belief. The heavy dungeon door creaked open, revealing the silhouettes of Erwin Smith and Captain Levi. It's time to go, Erwin said, his expression calm. Levi's eyes, cold and sharp, flicked between the two boys. Get up, brats. Your new life begins now. As they walked out of the darkness of the dungeons and into the uncertain light, Izuku knew that everything had changed. He was no longer hiding. He was an acknowledged power, a declared asset of the Survey Corps. But he was also on a leash, watched by a man who saw him not as a hero, but as a potential threat to be managed. The path ahead was fraught with danger, not just from the Titans, but from the very people he had sworn to protect. But for the first time in 5 years he felt a sense of purpose. He had a mission again. He had people to save. And that was a feeling he understood all too well.